When the letter arrived, I barely remembered my great Aunt Maeve, a distant relative, a name murmured at family gatherings, always followed by an uncomfortable silence. The letter stated she'd passed quietly in her sleep, leaving me her cottage and its unusual walled garden. Unusual, it turned out, was an understatement. The cottage was small, nestled deep in the forgotten countryside. Its roof sagged like a tired sigh, and the garden was a maze of overgrown hedges, choked flower beds, and a towering, circular stone wall that seemed to press in on the house. What struck me first, though, wasn't the wildness of it all, but the glint of broken glass. Embedded into the very fabric of the garden wall, like countless tiny, glittering eyes, were shards of vibrant green glass. Thousands of them, big and small, catching the sunlight with a strange, melancholic sparkle. It was beautiful in a disquieting way, and it was everywhere. My first week was spent clearing. The garden was a tangled beast. Roses with thorns like claws, weeds taller than me, and everywhere, the glass. It wasn't just decorative, it was structural. Entire sections of the wall were fortified with mortar and these sharp, emerald fragments. I found old gardening tools in the shed, their handles smooth from years of use, but everything felt heavy, steeped in some forgotten sadness. As I worked, I'd occasionally hear it. A whisper carried on the breeze, just at the edge of hearing. It wasn't words, not exactly, more like a drawn-out sigh, mournful and deep. I put it down to the wind, or perhaps the rustling of leaves in the ancient trees that guarded the perimeter. But sometimes, when I was alone, pulling a particularly stubborn root, the air would grow cold around me, even on a warm afternoon, and the whisper would feel closer, almost intimate. One evening, as dusk bled into night, I sat on the cottage's small porch, exhausted, sipping lukewarm tea. The garden was a silhouette against the fading light, and the glass in the wall seemed to glow with an inner luminescence. That's when I saw it, a faint, shimmering outline near the center of the garden, where a gnarled, ancient apple tree stood. It was indistinct, like heat haze, but it moved, a slow, drifting motion. My heart hammered against my ribs. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was overtired, imagining things. But when I looked again, the shape was still there, now closer to the wall, almost pressed against it. It didn't have features, just a general human form, translucent and wavering. Then, a distinct sound, like fingernails dragging across stone, echoed from the garden. It was too precise to be the wind. I retreated indoors, locking the door and pulling the curtains tight. My sleep that night was fitful, filled with dreams of splintering glass and mournful cries. The next morning, I tried to rationalize it all. Tiredness, imagination, an old house settling, but as I surveyed the garden, a small detail caught my eye. On one section of the wall, where the shimmering figure had been closest, the glinting green glass shards seemed disturbed. A few of the smaller fragments, which had been firmly mortared in, lay loose on the ground below, as if gently dislodged. And on the stone surface, just above where they'd fallen, was a faint, almost imperceptible smudge, shaped like a handprint. Not a dirty handprint, but a pale, spectral imprint. My breath hitched. This was no settling house. This was something else. The more I cleared the garden, the more prominent the presence became. The whispers grew louder, sometimes bordering on a low, sorrowful moan. The air would suddenly drop in temperature, raising goosebumps on my arms. I started noticing things about the glass in the wall. It wasn't randomly placed. While it was everywhere, some sections had denser concentrations of smaller, sharper pieces, almost like a deliberate barrier. And the glass wasn't just any glass, it was distinctively a particular shade of deep emerald green, like antique bottles or ornate decorative panes. I found a small, rusted plaque half buried near the apple tree. It simply read, Ilara, beloved daughter, 1902-1922, Ilara, a name I'd never heard in relation to Aunt Maeve or the cottage. I researched the cottage history at the local library. The librarian, a kind woman with spectacles perched on her nose, remembered Maeve as a recluse. She found an old newspaper clipping, "Tragedy at the Old Grove Cottage." It detailed the accidental death of Elara Thorne, Maeve's younger sister, in 1922. She was 20 years old. The report was vague, mentioning a fall, a broken greenhouse, and a devastating loss. Mine eyes widened as I read. A greenhouse. And then I remembered the specific green hue of the glass in the wall. It wasn't just decorative. It was the shattered remains of Elara's greenhouse, painstakingly embedded into the wall, a monument to her memory, or perhaps a prison. That night, the presence was undeniable. The mournful whispers filled the air. I could feel a heavy sorrow pressing down on me. I went outside, drawn by an invisible force, into the moonlight-drenched garden. The shimmering figure was clearer now, standing by the section of the wall with the most concentrated glass. It was still translucent, but I could make out a long, flowing dress, and arms that seemed to be reaching, desperate. Its head was bowed, and from it emanated an unbearable sadness. As I watched, the figure slowly lifted its head. There were no eyes, no face, just an impression of profound, unending grief. And then, a sound I hadn't heard before, a fragile, tinkling melody, like countless tiny bells. It was the sound of the glass singing in unison. The tinkling grew louder, the whispers more urgent. It was Elara, trapped. Maeve hadn't just used the glass to remember her sister, she'd unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, woven Elara's fragmented spirit into the very wall constructed from the remnants of her last moments. Elara was trying to break through, to escape the Emerald Prison. I understood then. She wasn't malicious, she was just lost, heartbroken, and yearning for release. I walked to the wall, ignoring the spectral chill. My hand reached out, touching the cold stone, the sharp glass. "You can go, Elara," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It's time to rest." As I spoke, the shimmering figure recoiled, then slowly began to dissipate, like mist in the morning sun. The tinkling of glass softened, becoming a final, fading sigh. The air grew warm again. The next morning, I began to carefully, piece by painstaking piece, remove the glass from the garden wall, not to repair it, but to set her free. The garden would never truly be silent again, but the mournful whisper had been replaced by a quiet, gentle breeze, a lingering presence that finally felt at peace. And I knew, without a doubt, that I was not alone in that cottage, but I was no longer afraid. Thank you for listening. If this story found you in the dark, subscribe and turn on notifications. A new tale waits every night.